Sarah Martinez adjusted her position on the rocky outcrop, feeling the desert heat seep through her tactical gear. The sun blazed overhead like an angry eye, turning the landscape into a shimmering mirage of sand and stone. She had been lying in this position for nearly 6 hours, watching the compound below through her high-powered scope. Every muscle in her body screamed for movement, but she remained perfectly still, a statue carved from determination and training. The mission had seemed impossible from the start. Intelligence reports indicated that Viktor Kozlov, a notorious arms dealer responsible for supplying weapons to terrorist organizations across 3 continents, would be meeting with potential buyers at a remote facility in the Syrian desert. The problem was location and timing. The compound sat in a valley surrounded by steep ridges, making approach nearly impossible. Traditional assault teams would be spotted miles away, and airstrikes were out of the question due to civilian populations nearby. That left one option, a long-range elimination shot from the northern ridge. The distance measured just over 2,000 meters, well beyond what most snipers would consider feasible. The terrain was unforgiving, the weather conditions brutal, and the target window would be measured in seconds, not minutes. Command had been skeptical when Sarah volunteered for the assignment, but her record spoke for itself. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq, and a collection of confirmed long-distance kills that made her one of the most respected marksmen in the special operations community. Sarah had arrived at her position before dawn, climbing the treacherous ridge in darkness with her spotter, Marcus Chen, a soft-spoken Marine from California who had worked with her on 4 previous missions. They moved like shadows, carrying their equipment in specialized packs designed to minimize noise and reflection. The climb took 3 hours, navigating loose rocks and narrow ledges that would challenge even experienced mountaineers. Once in position, they established their hide site with practiced efficiency. Marcus set up the observation equipment while Sarah assembled her rifle, a custom-built .338 Lapua Magnum that had been her companion through countless missions. The weapon was more than just a tool. It was an extension of herself, every component calibrated to her specifications and tested under extreme conditions. She knew its capabilities and limitations better than she knew her own heartbeat. The waiting began as the sun crested the horizon. Through her scope, the compound looked like a miniature model, buildings and vehicles reduced to tiny shapes, wavering in the heat distortion. Sarah could make out guards patrolling the perimeter, their movements following predictable patterns that suggested inadequate training. Vehicles came and went throughout the morning, kicking up dust clouds that provided temporary concealment, but also indicated increased activity. Marcus monitored radio traffic and environmental conditions, feeding Sarah a steady stream of information. Wind speed and direction, temperature variations, humidity levels, all factors that would affect bullet trajectory over such an extreme distance. The heat was particularly problematic, creating thermal layers that could deflect projectiles in unpredictable ways. What looked like a clear shot might be completely off target due to invisible atmospheric conditions. By noon, the heat had become almost unbearable. Sarah's tactical clothing was designed to regulate body temperature, but nothing could completely offset the desert sun. Sweat stung her eyes despite the moisture-wicking headband, and she had to resist the urge to shift position every few minutes. Marcus provided cooling gel packs and electrolyte supplements, but the physical toll was mounting with each passing hour. The psychological pressure was equally intense. Sarah knew that hundreds of people were depending on this mission's success. Kozlov's weapon shipments had resulted in numerous terrorist attacks across Europe and the Middle East. His elimination would disrupt several major arms-dealing networks and potentially save countless innocent lives. The weight of that responsibility sat heavy on her shoulders, but she channeled the pressure into focus, using it to sharpen her concentration rather than cloud her judgment. Around 2 in the afternoon, Marcus detected increased radio chatter from the compound. Several high-end vehicles had arrived, their occupants remaining inside the air-conditioned interiors while security teams swept the area. This suggested that important figures were preparing to meet, possibly including their primary target. Sarah adjusted her scope settings and began systematic breathing exercises to control her heart rate and steady her aim. The compound's main building was a converted warehouse with multiple entrances and exit points. Intelligence suggested that meetings typically took place in the central conference room, which had large windows facing the northern ridge. This provided the only viable shot angle, but the distance and environmental conditions made it extremely challenging. Sarah would need perfect timing, precise calculations, and more than a little luck. As the afternoon wore on, more vehicles arrived. Through her scope, Sarah could see figures moving between buildings, but the heat distortion made positive identification impossible at this range. She needed her target to be in the right place at the right time, preferably near one of the large windows where atmospheric interference might be minimized. The waiting continued, each minute stretching like an hour under the relentless desert sun. Marcus suddenly tensed beside her, pressing his earpiece closer as he monitored communications. Intelligence had picked up confirmation that Kozlov was indeed at the compound and preparing for the scheduled meeting. The information sent a jolt of adrenaline through Sarah's system, but she forced herself to remain calm and focused. After hours of preparation and waiting, the moment of truth was finally approaching. The heat haze continued to dance across the landscape like ghostly flames, distorting everything beyond a few hundred meters. Sarah knew that she would need to time her shot perfectly, waiting for momentary breaks in the thermal distortion while simultaneously accounting for wind patterns and bullet drop. She began running through final calculations, considering every variable that could affect the projectile's flight path over the extreme distance. As evening approached and the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Sarah remained locked in position on the ridge, her rifle trained on the distant compound. Every sense was heightened, every nerve ending alert for the slightest sign that her target was moving into position. The mission had reached its critical phase, and success or failure would be determined in the next few hours. The golden hour brought both relief and new challenges as the desert temperature began to drop from its crushing midday peak. Sarah felt the subtle shift in wind patterns that came with the changing thermal conditions, requiring constant adjustments to her calculations. Through her scope, the heat haze started to settle into more predictable patterns, but visibility remained compromised by the shimmering distortion that made distant objects appear to dance and waver. Marcus had been monitoring communications intercepts for the past hour, piecing together fragments of conversation that painted a clearer picture of the situation below. Multiple arms dealers had converged on the compound for what appeared to be a major transaction involving surface-to-air missiles and advanced explosive devices. Kozlov was reportedly coordinating the entire operation, making this meeting a critical target for disrupting several terrorist networks simultaneously. The compound showed increased activity as afternoon shifted toward evening. Security teams conducted regular sweeps of the perimeter while additional vehicles arrived carrying personnel and equipment. Sarah counted at least 30 individuals moving between the various buildings, their movements suggesting a high level of organization and security awareness. This was no amateur operation. These people understood the value of caution and the importance of protecting their high-value assets. Through her scope, Sarah observed the main warehouse building where intelligence indicated the primary meeting would take place. Large windows on the second floor provided the only viable angle for her shot, but the distance and atmospheric conditions continued to present significant challenges. She would need perfect timing and exceptional accuracy to succeed under these circumstances. As the sun continued its descent, Marcus provided updated wind readings and atmospheric data. The changing conditions actually worked in their favor, as the thermal layers that had plagued them throughout the day were beginning to stabilize. The heat haze still presented problems, but experienced snipers learned to read the distortion patterns and time their shots accordingly. Around 5 in the evening, increased radio chatter indicated that the main meeting was about to commence. Several high-profile figures had arrived in armored vehicles, their security details establishing defensive positions around the warehouse. Sarah adjusted her breathing and began final preparations for what might be her only opportunity. The target window could last anywhere from seconds to minutes, depending on how the meeting unfolded and where participants positioned themselves. Marcus suddenly grabbed her arm, pointing toward the compound's main entrance. A convoy of 3 black SUVs had arrived, their occupants remaining inside, while security teams conducted thorough perimeter checks. The level of protection suggested someone extremely important had just arrived, possibly their primary target. Sarah felt her heart rate increase but forced herself to maintain steady breathing and focus on the task ahead. The waiting continued as figures moved between vehicles and buildings, but positive identification remained impossible at this extreme distance. Sarah needed her target to position himself near one of the large windows, preferably standing still long enough for her to account for all environmental factors and deliver an accurate shot. The margin for error was essentially zero. A miss would alert security forces and eliminate any chance of mission success. Through her scope, Sarah watched as groups of people began entering the main warehouse building. The meeting was clearly underway, with participants gathering in what appeared to be a second-floor conference room. Large windows provided visibility into the space, but heat distortion continued to make positive target identification extremely difficult. She would need to wait for the perfect combination of atmospheric conditions and target positioning. Marcus monitored multiple communication channels, feeding Sarah real-time intelligence about the meeting's progress. Arms dealers from several countries were reportedly present, discussing transactions involving millions of dollars worth of advanced weaponry. Kozlov was confirmed to be leading the negotiations, making him the highest priority target in a room full of dangerous individuals. The psychological pressure intensified as Sarah realized how many variables had to align perfectly for mission success. Wind conditions, atmospheric distortion, target positioning, timing. Any single factor could result in failure and the loss of a critical opportunity to disrupt multiple terrorist networks. She channeled the pressure into concentration, using years of training and experience to maintain focus under extreme stress. As the golden hour progressed, lighting conditions in the compound began to change. Interior lights came on in the warehouse building, providing better visibility through the large windows, but also creating new challenges with reflection and glare. Sarah adjusted her scope settings and continued monitoring the conference room, waiting for her target to move into the optimal position for a clear shot. The heat haze began to settle into more predictable patterns as the sun dropped lower on the horizon. Sarah could see figures moving around the conference room, but positive identification remained elusive. She needed Kozlov to position himself near the windows, preferably standing still for several seconds to allow for proper target acquisition and shot execution. Marcus provided continuous updates on wind conditions and atmospheric readings. The environmental factors were gradually becoming more favorable, but the window of opportunity might be brief. Desert conditions could change rapidly as the sun set, potentially creating new challenges just when the shot became possible. Timing would be absolutely critical for mission success. Around 6 in the evening, Marcus detected significant changes in radio traffic patterns. The meeting appeared to be reaching a critical phase, with participants moving around the conference room more frequently. Through her scope, Sarah could see increased activity near the large windows, suggesting that key figures might be positioning themselves for better visibility or communication purposes. The waiting continued as Sarah maintained perfect position on the rocky ridge, her rifle trained on the distant compound. Every muscle in her body ached from hours of motionless observation, but she ignored the discomfort and focused entirely on the mission objective. Years of training had prepared her for exactly this type of extreme endurance challenge. As the sun began its final descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert landscape, Sarah knew that the critical moment was approaching. The heat haze was settling. Lighting conditions were improving, and intelligence indicated that the meeting was reaching its climax. Soon she would either achieve mission success or face the reality of an impossible shot under deteriorating conditions. The sun hung like a burning coin just above the western horizon, casting the desert landscape in shades of gold and crimson. Sarah felt the subtle shift in atmospheric conditions as the day's heat began to dissipate, creating more stable air currents that would be crucial for her shot. The heat haze that had plagued her observations all day was finally settling into predictable patterns, though visibility remained challenging at the extreme distance. Marcus pressed his earpiece closer, his expression growing tense as he monitored the latest intelligence updates. The meeting in the compound had reached a critical phase, with multiple arms deals reportedly being finalized simultaneously. Kozlov was confirmed to be orchestrating the entire operation from the conference room, making this the perfect opportunity to eliminate a high-value target and disrupt several terrorist supply networks in one decisive action. Through her scope, Sarah could see increased movement in the warehouse building's second-floor conference room. Multiple figures gathered around what appeared to be a large table, their silhouettes visible through the expansive windows. The improved lighting conditions provided better target definition, but positive identification still required patience and perfect timing. She needed her target to position himself in the optimal location for a clear shot. The psychological pressure had been building throughout the day, but Sarah channeled it into razor-sharp focus. She had spent years training for exactly this type of extreme-range engagement, learning to account for every variable that could affect bullet trajectory over vast distances: wind speed and direction, atmospheric pressure, temperature variations, even the Coriolis effect caused by Earth's rotation. All factors that became critical at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. Marcus provided continuous updates on environmental conditions, his voice steady despite the tension. Wind patterns were stabilizing as the day's thermal activity decreased, but they still faced challenging crosswinds that could deflect the projectile by several feet over such an extreme distance. Sarah made minute adjustments to her scope settings, preparing for what might be her only opportunity to complete the mission successfully. The compound's security forces maintained their vigilant patrols, unaware of the threat positioned on the distant ridge. Their defensive posture focused on ground-level approaches and potential air attacks, leaving the northern ridge unmonitored due to the seemingly impossible shooting distance. This oversight would prove critical if Sarah could execute her shot with the precision required for success at this range. As the golden hour progressed, Sarah noticed subtle changes in the heat distortion patterns. The wavering effect that had made target identification nearly impossible was beginning to stabilize into more predictable oscillations. Experienced snipers learned to read these atmospheric conditions and time their shots during brief moments of clarity when distortion reached minimum levels. Around 6:30, Marcus detected significant radio chatter indicating that the meeting was approaching its conclusion. Multiple arms dealers were reportedly finalizing major transactions, with Kozlov serving as the primary coordinator and point of contact. This suggested that he would likely remain in the conference room for the duration of the negotiations, providing a stable target if he positioned himself near the windows. Through her scope, Sarah watched as figures moved around the conference room, their movements suggesting animated discussion and negotiation. The interior lighting provided good visibility through the large windows, but she still needed her specific target to move into the optimal position for a clear shot. Patience remained critical. Rushing the shot could result in missing the target, or hitting an unintended individual. The physical demands of maintaining position for over 10 hours were taking their toll. Sarah's muscles cramped from prolonged immobility, and despite Marcus's efforts to provide hydration and cooling relief, the desert conditions had pushed her endurance to its limits. She ignored the discomfort and focused entirely on the mission objective, drawing on years of training and mental conditioning. As the sun continued its descent, atmospheric conditions continued to improve for long-range shooting. The thermal layers that had caused significant bullet deflection throughout the day were stabilizing, though unpredictable air currents still posed challenges. Sarah would need to account for multiple environmental factors while executing a shot that pushed the absolute limits of her rifle's effective range. Marcus suddenly tensed, pressing his earpiece as new intelligence came through their communication system. Surveillance assets had confirmed positive identification of Viktor Kozlov in the conference room, positioned near the large windows overlooking the compound's central courtyard. This was exactly the positioning Sarah needed for a viable shot, but she would have to act quickly before he moved to a less favorable location. Through her scope, Sarah focused on the conference room windows, searching for her target among the multiple figures visible in the well-lit interior. The distance made positive identification challenging even with high-powered optics, but intelligence guidance helped narrow her focus to specific individuals near the windows. She began final preparations for what could be her only opportunity. The heat haze showed brief moments of clarity as atmospheric conditions continued to stabilize. Sarah timed the distortion patterns, waiting for the optimal moment when thermal interference would be minimal. These windows of opportunity lasted only seconds, requiring perfect timing and exceptional marksmanship skills to execute successfully under such extreme conditions. Marcus provided final wind readings and atmospheric data, his voice tense with anticipation. Environmental conditions were as favorable as they were likely to get under the circumstances, but the shot would still require extraordinary skill and more than a little luck. Sarah controlled her breathing and heart rate, preparing for the most challenging shot of her career. As the sun touched the western horizon, casting long shadows across the desert landscape, Sarah finally spotted her target through a momentary break in the heat haze. A tall figure in dark clothing stood near the conference room windows, his profile matching the intelligence photographs of Viktor Kozlov. This was the moment she had waited for throughout the long, brutal day. The crosshairs settled on the target as Sarah made final adjustments for wind and distance. Her finger found the trigger as she controlled her breathing, waiting for the perfect moment when atmospheric conditions aligned for maximum accuracy. The shot that would determine mission success or failure was only heartbeats away. Time seemed to compress into crystalline moments as Sarah maintained perfect sight picture through her scope. The tall figure near the conference room windows matched every detail from the intelligence photographs of Viktor Kozlov, standing in animated discussion with other arms dealers while gesturing toward documents spread across the table. The heat haze showed a brief window of clarity, and Sarah knew this might be her only opportunity. Marcus whispered final atmospheric readings, his voice barely audible despite their isolation on the rocky ridge. Wind speed had stabilized at 12 miles per hour from the southeast, temperature dropping to 94 degrees as the sun touched the horizon. These conditions represented the best shooting environment they had encountered throughout the entire day of observation and waiting. Sarah's finger rested lightly on the trigger as she made microscopic adjustments to her aim point, accounting for the extreme distance and multiple environmental factors. The bullet would travel for nearly 3 seconds over the 2,000-meter distance, during which time wind drift, gravity, and atmospheric pressure would all affect its trajectory. Every calculation had to be perfect for the shot to succeed. The psychological pressure reached its peak as Sarah realized that hundreds of innocent lives potentially hung in the balance. Kozlov's arms-dealing network supplied weapons to terrorist organizations across 3 continents, and eliminating him could disrupt multiple planned attacks. The weight of responsibility was enormous, but she channeled it into unwavering focus and determination. Through her scope, Sarah watched as Kozlov moved closer to the window, apparently pointing out security positions to his associates. This positioning provided the clearest shot angle she had observed all day, with minimal obstruction and optimal lighting conditions. The target remained stationary for several seconds, providing the stability necessary for precision shooting at extreme range. The heat distortion reached a momentary minimum as thermal layers aligned perfectly. Sarah controlled her breathing, allowing her heart rate to settle between beats. Years of training had prepared her for this exact moment, and muscle memory took over as she applied steady rearward pressure on the trigger. The rifle's mechanisms functioned with mechanical precision, releasing the carefully loaded projectile. The .338 Lapua Magnum cartridge erupted from the muzzle with controlled violence, sending the precision-manufactured bullet arcing across the desert landscape. Sarah maintained perfect sight picture through the recoil, watching through her scope as the projectile traveled its invisible path toward the distant target. Time stretched endlessly during the bullet's flight, each second feeling like an eternity of suspense. Marcus tracked the bullet's progress through high-powered binoculars, monitoring for impact, while Sarah remained focused on the target area. The extreme distance made immediate impact assessment difficult, but the carefully calculated trajectory appeared to be tracking accurately toward the intended point of impact. Environmental conditions had aligned as perfectly as could be expected under the challenging circumstances. Nearly 3 seconds after the shot, Sarah observed the impact through her scope. The tall figure near the conference room window suddenly collapsed, disappearing from view as chaos erupted throughout the meeting space. Other occupants scattered in panic, seeking cover and attempting to locate the source of the attack. The shot had found its mark with devastating precision, despite the seemingly impossible distance. Marcus confirmed the successful impact through his observation equipment, his voice tense with excitement and relief. Intelligence intercepts immediately indicated massive confusion within the compound as security forces attempted to respond to an attack from an unknown direction. The extreme range had made source location nearly impossible, providing crucial time for extraction from their exposed position. The compound erupted into frantic activity as vehicles raced between buildings and security teams established defensive positions. Radio traffic indicated complete confusion about the attack's origin and method. with some reports suggesting rocket or missile strikes rather than conventional small arms fire. This confusion would buy valuable time for Sarah and Marcus to begin their withdrawal from the ridge. Sarah began breaking down her rifle with practiced efficiency, while Marcus packed the observation equipment and prepared for immediate departure. The successful shot represented only the first phase of their mission. They still needed to traverse the treacherous ridge terrain and reach the extraction point without detection by pursuit forces. The challenging environment that had complicated their shot would now provide concealment for their escape. Intelligence updates confirmed the elimination of Viktor Kozlov and the complete disruption of the arms-dealing meeting. Multiple terrorist organizations would lose a critical supply source, potentially preventing numerous planned attacks across Europe and the Middle East. The extreme-range shot had achieved strategic objectives that would have required major military operations using conventional approaches. As they prepared to leave their hide site, Sarah felt a mixture of professional satisfaction and physical exhaustion. The mission had pushed her skills and endurance to absolute limits, requiring precision shooting under some of the most challenging conditions imaginable. The successful outcome validated years of intensive training and preparation for exactly this type of critical assignment. Marcus led the way down the treacherous ridge as darkness began to settle over the desert landscape. Their extraction route followed a carefully planned path that avoided known security positions while taking advantage of natural concealment features. The cooling evening air provided relief from the day's brutal heat, but the terrain remained dangerous and demanding. The compound continued to buzz with confused activity as they made their way toward the extraction point. Vehicle headlights swept across the surrounding landscape as security forces searched for evidence of the attack's origin. However, the extreme shooting distance and the rocky ridge's natural camouflage had made their position virtually undetectable from the compound below. 3 hours after the shot, Sarah and Marcus reached the predetermined extraction coordinates, where a stealth helicopter waited to transport them to safety. As they lifted off into the desert night, Sarah could see the compound's lights still blazing as security forces continued their fruitless search for attackers who had already vanished into the darkness. The mission had succeeded beyond expectations, demonstrating that seemingly impossible shots could be achieved through careful planning, exceptional skill, and favorable conditions. The ridge that had seemed completely out of range had provided the perfect platform for eliminating a high-value target and disrupting multiple terrorist networks with a single, precisely placed bullet. During the flight back to base, Sarah reflected on the day's events and the factors that had contributed to mission success. The extreme-range shot had required every aspect of her training and experience, from environmental assessment to precision marksmanship. Under pressure, the successful outcome would serve as validation for long-range engagement tactics and the value of patient, methodical approach to complex missions. The elimination of Viktor Kozlov represented a significant victory against international terrorism and arms trafficking. Intelligence estimates suggested that his death would disrupt weapons supplies to multiple terrorist organizations and potentially prevent numerous planned attacks. The strategic impact of the mission far exceeded the resources invested in its execution, demonstrating the value of precision operations against high-value targets. As the helicopter carried them toward safety and debriefing, Sarah cleaned and inspected her rifle, ensuring it remained in perfect condition for future missions. The weapon had performed flawlessly under extreme conditions, delivering the accuracy and reliability required for mission success. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and assignments, but tonight belonged to the satisfaction of a mission accomplished against impossible odds.